There we go. What would I do without my regulars? Thanks, Lars. Oh my God. I need to get better at this. All right. Anyways, so welcome everybody. So as I was just saying, and yeah, so we're looking good. I can see my meter on the audio mixer. So what I wanted to do, first of all, to get us back into the groove, we're going to look at what we built yesterday, well, last week. And then we're going to look at what we're going to build today. So let me switch to the coding view. Here we are. And then I'm going to run the application on my simulator, and we're going to have a look at what we achieved last week. So here is our simulator, and what we did last week was implement the summarization feature. So if we go into a blog post and then press this icon here, it'll take a moment, and then we'll have this really nice summary. And if we look into the log output, you will see that it says attempting local inference. And also, one thing that is really nice about this console is that you can turn on all of the metadata, and then you can see when this log message was sent, what was the binary, what's the subsystem, and the components. So these were all of the things that we configured. So if we go back into our class, and then we take a look at the logger implementation, we can see that attempting local inference is this log message here, and our logger implementation says the subsystem is dev.peterfreeze.sophia, and the category is summarizer, and that's what we can see here. So that's really nice. All right. So what we saw in this post was the local summarizer. So for the local summarizer, we're using Apple's foundation models, but for this other post here, this will not work. So if I press this, we can see that it says attempting local inference, and then we get this error message here saying that the local summarizer failed for exceeding the context window size because we have too many tokens in there, and then we're automatically falling back to the remote inferencer. And that makes use of Firebase AI logic, which will then use Gemini 2.5 Flash Lite to perform our summary. And we can also go into our Firebase console, where we have AI monitoring. So you can see that, these were the last 24 hours. You can see that I already played around a little bit in the afternoon, and you can see that we have our traces here, and this one is the most recent one that we just sent. And here is our input. This is the blog post text. So a long blog post. And then here is our system instructions, which say, please create a short, snappy, and informative summary of the following text. Cool. So that is what we achieved last time. And today, what I want to do is I want to use remote config so that we can adjust our implementation. A couple of things that come to mind when we think about what we might want to do in terms of customization or remotely controlling how the system works is obviously, for example, we might want to fine-tune our system instructions. So once the application is rolled out and it's been shipped to the App Store, people are starting to use it, and then we might realize, oh, the summarizer isn't working well, and we might want to, I don't know, maybe there is a typo, right? We made an embarrassing typo and that has a negative impact on the performance of our summarization. So obviously, one way to do that, one way to fix it is to update our code, build a new build, ship that to the App Store, but that has to go through the whole review cycle, and that might take a while. And even if we have an expedited review, it still might take, I don't know, like a couple of hours or maybe even a day. And if we use remote config, we can extract this kind of information. For example, we can extract this prompt and send it from our backend, and our application will then use the prompt that we define on our backend via the Firebase console, and it will use this prompt. So if we realize, oh my God, we made a typo, we can easily fix the prompt in the Firebase Remote Config console, save, publish, and then our clients will pick this up. And then when users try to summarize a blog post, it will pick up the latest version of the prompt. So that is one thing. Another thing that might also be interesting is we might want to change the order in which we use our inferences. So here in this summarizer service, you can see that we have this for loop and we iterate over our inferences, and you can see that we have this statically typed and hard-coded list of inferences, and we have the local summarizer, which is our first inferencer, and then we have the remote summarizer, which is our second inferencer. So every time the user tries to summarize something, we will first use the local summarizer, because this for loop will just iterate over our array up here. So it will first try the local summarizer, and then it will try the remote summarizer if the local summarizer doesn't work. For example, because the text that we want to summarize is too long. But at one point we might decide, oh, let's do this differently. Let's maybe first try the remote summarizer and then try the local summarizer. Or we might want to completely turn off the remote summarizer, or we might want to completely turn off the local summarizer. Or maybe at one point somebody says, well, why don't we implement yet another remote summarizer? Maybe let's use OpenAI's APIs to implement a summarizer as well. And then we might want to be able to plug this in and use it. So we might want to be able to adjust the order of inferences and also which ones should be enabled or should be used in the first place. And then maybe the most important thing is, if you look at the model name that we are using here, you will realize that this also is a hard-coded string. And that is something that might require updating as well, because those large language models, they are very resource intensive, and that means that companies can't keep them around for a very, very long time, right? So Google typically keeps them around for a couple of generations, but at one point they will be deprecated, and then at one point they will be turned off once a new version of the model has been rolled out and has been in production for a while, right? So at one point you might no longer be able to use Gemini 1.0, for example, or Gemini 1.5. And of course, you can compile a new version of your application and roll it out, but that's just, it's extra work. and being able to remotely control the name of the model, that is something that you can very easily do. So this is what we're going to do today. And instead of implementing everything manually, I am going to use Gemini CLI to do that for me. So first of all, I'm going to start the Gemini CLI, and let's make this easier to read for you guys. Okay. Let me know if this is large enough for you to read. I can make it larger. So one of the first things when you work with an agent like the Gemini CLI is that you should probably let the agent discover how the project works. And I've already created something that should be useful for the agent. So if we go into, and I need to click here. So if we look into our project folder, you will see that I've got a couple of agent files here. And this agent file here is a description of the application itself. So it gives a project overview, it talks a bit about the architecture, it talks about the core technologies, and I didn't write any of this. So I asked Gemini to generate this file for me. And it did a pretty good job, right? So it described all of the components, it discovered my backend, and it said, oh, you know, this has this semantic Q&A flow, it has an update embeddings flow, all of this is totally correct. It discovered the iOS application and where it is, it described the functionality. And then it also discovered this file here in .share/swift/GeminiMD. And if we look at that, you will see that this file contains only just one instruction, and that basically says, can you please import this other file? And the reason why I'm doing this is the Gemini CLI typically wants to use a file called gemini.md. You can configure it to use a differently named file, which I did here. So there is a settings.json file, and I told it, hey, you know, you should be using agents.md, context.md, and gemini.md. But I found that this only seems to work well for the top level file. And for any sub-level file, you need to somehow use this import. So that is why I'm doing this. Let me quickly take a sip of my tea. All right. Yep, we're back. So and in this file here, I've compiled a bunch of principles that I want my agents to follow when I have them write Swift code and Swift UI code. So there's lots of stuff about how concurrency works. There is lots of stuff about types. There are guidelines for Swift UI views. For example, it says, well, you know, you should use the hashtag preview macro and stuff like that. So lots of stuff here. How I compiled this file is I took some of the files that Peter Steinberger shared on one of his repositories a while ago, and then I also went to Gemini and said, well, can you please write me an agents file for modern Swift and Swift UI development, and had it also generate a file. And then I went into Xcode and took all the files that they're using for their agentic environment and also added them here. And then I told Gemini, okay, so you've got all those files. Can you please ingest all of them and then compile them into one big thing and you make sure that it makes sense. So this is what I've been using for the past couple of days. And I've been quite pleased with it, but there is still stuff that needs refining. So it's not perfect yet. Also, these imports here, additional documentation, that is also taken from Xcode. And these are files where Apple, for example, documents. So here is how the new toolbar features work in Swift UI. So, and somebody asked, what is your experience using Gemini CLI against Claude Code? So there's just so many agentic environments here. So what I've been mostly using is Cursor, and that is the reason why you see the Cursor IDE here. So I vibe coded the entire newsletter implementation on my blog using Cursor, and I was really pleased with that. I didn't use any agent file back then, but I did try to set this whole thing up so that Cursor can also use it. And that is one of the reasons why we have agents.md. I found that it mostly depends on the model though. So, okay, so that was just like a short overview of, what and why and what is the environment. So what I want to do now is I want to teach the agent how our summarization feature works. So, and to do that, I'll tell it, please read the code and then I can add to refer to a folder, and I can say, read the code in the summarization service package and understand how it works like. So now it will read this package, and we can take a quick look at the package in the meantime. So here is our package for the summarization service, and it contains this one file here, about 164 lines of code. And it has the summarizer service, and it has our two inferences. So, and let's see what it came back with. So it's still working, and it says, I've reviewed the code. It's a Swift package to generate short, informative summaries of a given text. Then it goes on to talk about how this is all made up. It talks about the class, it talks about the summarize method, and explains how all of this works. And yeah, so for example, for the local summarizer, it says this is the first inference in the chain. It uses Apple's on-device foundation models framework. It is only available on iOS 26 and later, which is checked using #available and the system language model.default.isAvailable property. On older versions, isAvailable will be false. And yeah, so all of this looks good. And then it talks about the execution flow, and all of that is great. So I'll now tell it to please write a purd file with what, let's not, be hasty. Please write a purd with what you learned about the summarization feature of this app and show it to me. So the PRD, product requirement document, that is a more formal representation of what we just saw here. So it should have a couple of sections, and one of them, for example, is the acceptance criteria. Another section is what's in scope and what's out of scope, and then of course a description of the features. So here we go. And yeah, nice. So we get a description of the features. We get, yeah, here we go. Here's the stuff that's out of scope. We get the user stories. We get technical implementation details. All right, so all of this looks good. Write it into a PRD file in the add, and then I want to write this into this folder here. So the reason why we're going through this exercise is to give the agent a much better understanding of how all of this works, so that when we start talking about new features we want to implement, it has a better understanding of how the existing system works without having to review all of it again and again. So now it wants to write this into a markdown file. That's great. Let's do it. And here is our markdown file. Let's take a quick look how this looks like in Cursor, because that has a nicer markdown renderer. Okay, here we go. So this looks really nice. And we have this table. Okay. Yeah. Cool. So now let's talk about how we can use remote config to remotely control this feature. I want to use remote config to remotely control several features of the summarization feature. Can you please first help me to think about which features we might want to remotely control? Give me an overview, and then let's discuss which ones we are going to implement. Okay. Okay, so it first needs to understand what remote config is. Let's see. Oops. Okay, so it did understand that we're talking about Firebase Remote Config. So feature flagging and rollouts. So this is a little bit hard to read here, but it basically suggests implementing a master kill switch so that we can turn the entire feature on and off. And that is actually a good idea, because as with all AI features, this can become quite expensive, right? So if we make a mistake in our implementation and, you know, maybe we're requesting lots of tokens, and then it can be very expensive. Or maybe maybe, you know, the application goes viral and lots of people want to use it, and then many people have large documents they want to summarize, and so this becomes very expensive, and then we might want to turn this entire feature off. Or maybe the AI starts to hallucinate because our prompt was not great, and then it generates contentious stuff. So, you know, that is a reason why we might want to turn the entire feature off. We might also want to turn individual inferences on and off, right? So that might be another thing. Also, yeah, I'm guessing that the reason why, so obviously using a table as a representation for this is not such an amazing idea. When I prepared for this, it didn't use a table to show me, and it was much easier to read, and I might ask it, so what are the parameters actually called, like, to get a better view, but you know, let's go through the other ones here. Model and inferencer configuration. So remote blah 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 specifies the exact remote model, so it's probably a remote model to use. Gemini 2.5 Flash Lite in this moment. Then there is another one, is local enabled or disabled, allows us to remotely disable the on-device summarizer. See, that's what I just mentioned. We might want to turn the entire thing on and off, or we want to turn individual inferences on and off. And then whatever, controls the order of inferences. So, and it looks like this is going to be an array, so that we can use to specify in which order we want to use the inferences. And then prompt engineering. This is one of the most impactful areas. The quality of the summary is highly dependent on the instructions, so the full set of instructions passed to the AI model. Okay, that is great. And then it also suggests how to proceed, and I think yeah, this is actually a good idea, because you know, we can implement those, and then I'm going to show you how it works, and that's going to be a really nice overview for the stream. So what do you think? Shall we proceed with implementing is summarization enabled and summarization instructions first? So I like what you told me here. Can you please update the PRD to include those additional features? And I think that hopefully should answer your question. Would you be following the same logic when creating a new feature? First, give the information and craft a PRD before going into implementation. It depends, right? So I found that for anything that is slightly more complex than, can you please add a button, or can you please refactor this code to make use of, I don't know, like a different API, I found it is really useful to have this PRD approach, because one, it helps you to think about a feature, and the AI can also give you you know, ideas that you maybe wouldn't have had yourselves, right? So I've often experienced that I asked the AI, hey, can you please help me implement this feature? Here's what I think. And then it came back with, yeah, here's your PRD. And then I also had a couple of additional ideas, or here is a suggestion how to implement that. And I thought, oh yeah, that's actually really smart. So let's look at that. It wants to update the PRD. So, oh, that is interesting. So now it suggests that the button will be hidden if is summarization enable is false. You can do that, and let's follow through with that. When I prepared, what is suggested was to throw an error if the feature is disabled, and then in my application it would show an error message as a dialog, basically saying, oh, this feature is not enabled at the moment. I think from a user's perspective, imagine if you're using the application and you got used to using the summarization feature, and one day you come in and you want to summarize a blog post, and then because the owner of the application decided, oh, there's a problem with the feature, they turned off the feature and now the button is not even visible, that would be very confusing for you as a user, for me too. So that is why in a production application, I would probably not do that, but instead, if the user taps on the button and the feature is disabled, I would show them an error message. But for now, let's do it this way. That's fine, I think. Okay, so and then it said, well, the remote config out of scope. It also is remote configuration for model names in inferencer priority. Okay, so let's allow this once. It also updated a couple of other things. Yeah, so is summarization enabled and summarization instructions. So these are the two remote config parameters that we are going to implement, or that it added to the PRD. Nice. I have updated the PRD to include the new remote config requirements. It's now saved in the project. Nice. Now let's go ahead and implement this. Can you please suggest how you are going to do that? Please show me your implementation design first, and then let's discuss before I greenlight your implementation. Okay. So this is another thing that I also found useful, to ask the AI to first give you an overview of what it wants to do, and then have the opportunity to jump in and say, well, actually, I don't want you to do it this way, but I want you to do it the other way. So let's take a look. Excellent. I've been analyzing the existing code and the new requirements. Here is my proposed implementation. So first of all, add new dependencies. I will include Firebase Remote Config. Perfect. Then create a remote config service. To keep the code organized and testable, I will create a new file named remote config service. Nice. This file will contain a new remote config class. It's a singleton. It will be the single source of truth. It will be responsible for defining the parameters in a type-safe way using an enum. Oh, that's interesting. Setting up the in-app defaults, that's also very important. Fetching and activating the latest versions from Firebase when the service is initialized. Yes. Providing simple, strongly typed properties for the rest of the app to consume. And that is actually really good, because that will allow us to have nicely readable and non-convoluted code at the call side, and all of the implementation details will be encapsulated in our remote config service. So that is a really good idea. Then it will update the inferencer protocol and implementations. That is required because our system instructions are currently hard-coded, and it wants to update the infer method, which currently only takes the input, and it will take the input and the instructions. So that is really important. And then it will update the local and remote summarizer. Great. And then it will update the summarizer service to make use of that. So all of this sounds good to me. Sounds good to me. Please go ahead and implement this. Yeah, so I think this whole way of building applications, we're all just in the middle of exploring how it best works, right? So do you remember, at the beginning when AI was not yet integrated in any of our development environments, and you basically had to go into the chatbot interface, into ChatGPT or into the Gemini app, and then copy your code from the IDE, paste it into the chatbot, and say, "Here is my code. Can you please implement blah blah blah?" Or maybe if you wanted to start afresh, you would say, "Hey, I want an application that does blah blah blah. Can you please create the code for me?" And then it would spit out the code in the chat window, and you would have to copy and paste it into your IDE. And now everything is integrated and much, much easier. Okay, so here's our dependency. Yeah, so, and I think what we have to figure out is what is the most elegant approach to use this new type of development. Here's our remote config service. So that's a completely new file. So I'm going to accept that, and then we should see it in Xcode. Here it is. Yep. Okay, so let's quickly review this. So we've got our instructions and copied them verbatim from our summarization service, so that's good. It made the remote config service a main actor. It also set up a logger. It made this a shared instance, so it's a singleton. We have our remote config reference. Here are our keys for our remote config parameters, and that is actually, yeah, I think it's a good idea. It's a good idea. Yeah. It has some limitations. For example, if you already have remote config parameters and they have underscores, so you would have to provide the custom string value here, but since we are greenfield, that should work fine. Then it initializes the remote config instance. It sets the defaults. Yep. And then it calls fetch and activate, so that will make a call to remote config to fetch any values that we've defined in the Firebase console. And once they have been fetched, we can read them, and it will also evaluate the status and make a log output. And then down here, we have our computed properties, which basically read the value from remote config. Nice. So let's see how we're doing here. And it seems like it wants to make some updates to the summarization service. So let's do that. And that is it. All right, so let's go and first let's build to see if everything compiles fine. So it failed. Okay. And this is actually something that it's been running into many, many times. So this API for setting up the generative model for Firebase AI logic is a bit confusing for the AI because it doesn't understand that we're doing all sorts of fancy footwork to make this easier, so you don't have to provide the extra typing there. So let's run this. So it compiles, it runs, build succeeded. Where is our simulator? Okay, so, and in the background you can see remote config fetched and activated. We don't have any values set yet. So if we go in here and then tap on this button, it will actually perform the summarization. But let's now go into remote config, into the console, and define a key. And you see that I've already been playing around with it. So all of these values are from my previous run through. And you will also notice that they have completely different names. So we can just ignore them and then go into our code and get our new values. So where is our enum? Here we are. So let's start with is summarization enabled, because that will be the most easy to see. So I can now add a parameter. I'll use this name and then I'll say this is a Boolean and I want to set it to false. I'll save it and then I will publish the changes. And now it's publishing the changes. And when I go back into the application, I'm going to delete this so it's easier to see. I tap on the button, it still works. So that is one of the limitations of the way how we're currently using remote config, but I'll show you that there is a different way in a moment. But first of all, let's imagine the user is still using the application. We want to use this kill switch to turn off the feature, and there is like a bunch of users that are still able to use this feature. But at one point, they will leave the application and then iOS will offload or like kill the application, and at one point they will restart the application, and then we will reload the remote configuration and go in. The user taps the button and then it says the summarization feature is currently disabled. Nice. So we know that this feature works, and while we're at it, let's also go and try out our summarization instructions. So this is a string, and in order to demonstrate how this works, what we're going to do is I'm going to copy this entire prompt here, and then let's do something fun with it. So also I think I'll do this, and then so that looks nicer. So tomorrow is the Apple event. So why don't we tell our application to talk like Tim Cook? Talk like Tim Cook. So save this, publish the change, and then let's run the application again. Oh, and the feature is currently disabled. So if we do this, it will say is disabled. So let's go back and re-enable it. True, save, publish, and restart the app. All right, so let's go in here. Okay. All right, everyone, let's talk about building better, more reusable components in SwiftUI. This guide walks you through transforming basic hard-coded action menu into a flexible custom view. Yeah, and you'll create elegant, maintainable code that behaves just like Apple's own components. So it's not as impressive as I thought it would be. Let's try it with this other one here. So when I tried it out in the beginning earlier today, it started with "here at Apple," which was hilarious. So let's see what it does with this. Yeah, it's also not super Apple-y. Let's try something different. So let's go and say talk like a pirate. So that should definitely sound different. So let's go here, delete this, and ahoy mateys! This guide be showing you how to craft a reusable action menu in SwiftUI, making your code shipshape and tidy. Yeah, so you can see that now we can easily go in and change how those parts of our application work, like by just going into the Firebase console, making a couple of changes, publish them, and boom, they are in our application without us having to recompile the application. But wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have to restart the application? And there is such a thing. So if we go into the remote config documentation, there is an entry about understanding real-time remote config. And here is this diagram, and it basically explains that when you use real-time remote config, your application will open a real-time listener and it will listen to any remote config changes that you make on the backend server. And that is exactly what we want. So if we scroll down, we can click on listening for updates in real time, and then we get this this code snippet here. And if you've been using any Firebase APIs, this add on config update listener will look very familiar to you. It's very similar, for example, to our document snapshot listeners. So the closure that is here behind our function name, that will receive two parameters. One is the config update. The second one is potentially an error. And then we can look at the config update and we can inspect the updated keys. So it will just send the updated keys. It will not send the, it will probably send the entire thing, but it will send the updated keys in a specific field so that we can say, well, we're just interested in these. And then you can do whatever you want, right? So you have full control over when to activate this, because it might be a little bit jarring if, let's say, you enable your application team to remotely control, let's say, the color theming of the application, right? So there is maybe a pink theme and maybe there is a blue theme, and now you want to activate the pink theme, And the users in the application, you roll out the change, and then if you automatically activate this, it would fly into the user's face. And that might be very distracting. And that is why you have full control over when to call this activate method. And that will actually activate those configuration keys. And then you can do whatever you need in the application to do that. Yeah, so it also works on iOS. Nice. So you learned something new. I'm always happy when people tell me that they learned something new. So what we want to do is we'll go and ask the Gemini CLI to make this update for us. This is really nice, but I want to use remote config real time and make sure that any changes that we make to our remote configuration in the Firebase console get reflected immediately in the application. Can you please suggest how to update the remote config configuration service to implement this? And you know, that's another really nice thing when you ask the model to tell you how it would do something, and then you just ramble into the prompt, and then it comes back with this really amazing and elaborate and nicely written text. You know, that is another reason why you want to write a PRD, because it will turn your rambling into a nice and moderately formal document. So that's an excellent point. Using real-time updates is crucial for making the remote configuration truly dynamic. So it will use @onConfig update listener. That's great. And then it will make the remote config service observable so that our code will automatically pick up any changes. Oh, and here you go. Here's something that I absolutely don't want. So I don't want it to use @published. So we'll have to tell it about that. And also, that means that I'll have to update my agent files, because obviously using @observable and @published together is not such a great idea. Or is it? Let me see. No, it's not. So, what about the rest of the code though? Conceptual look at the changes. So here's our update listener, and it will do a fetch and activate, and yeah, basically read the values and assign them. Okay, this looks good, but really you shouldn't be using @published. Okay, and now because Super Whisper is not great at understanding this, we want to use modern Swift APIs after all, remember? Please tell me what your updated implementation strategy looks like. Oh, Evelyn, I'm not sure what Y refers to. Sorry, I didn't pay attention to when you typed that. So maybe you can say what the Y refers to, and then I'll be able to answer. Oh, it's probably why @published and observable don't go well together. You know, we want to make use of the observation framework, and that doesn't require us to use @published, and @published probably would get into the way of the observation framework. Yeah, so here it explains this. Using @published is part of the legacy observable object pattern, and the project conventions clearly state a preference for modern Swift APIs. The correct approach is to use the @observable macro, which is simpler and more performant because it will only trigger updates for the properties that update and not for the entire view, which in our case, because it's a service implementation, is not that relevant, but still. So it makes remote config observable, it implements a real-time listener, it updates the properties on fetch, and then ensure main actor execution and cleanup. Oh, it's even going to implement a dinit block to remove the listener. That is good. So this all looks good to me. And please go ahead and implement this. And, you know, what I really like about this approach is it is so much easier to get through lots of code in much shorter time that it makes me much more efficient, right? I mean, I could have written the code myself. It probably would have taken me longer than this. And I might have made a couple of mistakes and it would have been like lots of typing work. So doing it this way is really nice. And I still get to see all of the code, right? I have the final control over how the code looks like. And I can say, well, let's do it differently. And I feel like I still own the code, right? Because I saw all of it. You can turn on auto accept for changes, right? So I've been using the option 1 here, saying yes, allow once. I could say allow always, and that will automatically accept all the changes for the current session. But one, I want to be able to explain what's happening to you, and also if I do it just by myself, I also do it this way most of the time, except for if I'm really just prototyping something and I want the agent to go through a lot of changes in a very quick time. So let's do this. And I have successfully updated the code. Let's take a quick look if this still compiles. There is a problem. All right. So, and it talks about main actor isolated property cannot be referenced from a non-isolated context. So that's in the dinit. Oh yeah, I remember that. One way to deal with this is to say there is a compile error in blah, blah, blah. But I could also say there is a compile error. Can you please compile the code and see if there are any compile errors? So what should happen now is that it should use the Xcode build MCP server to compile the application or to compile the package, and that's exactly what's happening now. So it tells me it wants to use the Xcode build MCP server and use the Swift package build tool, and you can even see which package it wants to build. So I'm going to allow this once. And while it's doing that, I'm quickly going to show you the configuration. So in my settings file here for Gemini CLI, I have a bunch of MCP servers that I've registered. One of them is the GitHub Copilot one, so that I can talk to GitHub and do things like retrieve the latest reviews on a pull request, for example. there is an Xcode build MCP server, and that's the one that we're using right now. And then there is SoSumi or SoSumi, and that is an MCP server that is able to read Apple's documentation. Why is that important, you might ask? Apple's documentation makes use of lots of JavaScript to make it look beautiful and very functional for humans, but that makes it really difficult for machines to read it. And this service here parses Apple's documentation, makes it easily digestible for coding agents. So, and it has trouble compiling, so it wants to clean the cache. Let's see. Sometimes it has to go through a couple of rounds of cleaning up before it actually is able to build. Yes, let's do that again. While we're waiting for this to compile, I'd be curious to hear from you guys if you've been using any coding agents or maybe even the built-in Xcode coding intelligence in your projects and what your experience was. Was it useful, or was it a waste of time, or was it even out? Uh-oh, no, that we don't want. No. So hopefully it understands I didn't want it to change that part of the code. And I wonder why it's doing that. Is it because the documentation is not clear around this, or does it infer how to use this API by looking at the code? So that would be quite interesting to take a closer look at. Yeah, so all of the live streams will be recorded or are automatically recorded, and you can watch them on my YouTube channel, and also all the previous ones, so you can binge watch them now. Okay. It's really nice that it gives us kudos for being smart in the Firebase iOS SDK. I love that. No, please don't change this. There is another problem in the code, and I really want you to find the other part in the code that is the problem. Did you even try to compile? So if it doesn't find the problem in this turn, I'm going to copy the error message and just throw it at it. Addressing user frustration. And to be honest, I'm being nice. When nobody's watching, I'm a little bit more direct. What was that about a missing semicolon? So, let's see. Okay, so what are people saying? So, somebody says they've used mostly Claude code. It's quite good, but I would not enable auto accept either also I wanted to start making PRDs so your live stream comes on point. Awesome. Let me know how it goes. Tell me, and you can add a comment under this video and I'll definitely read them. Or join the stream next week. Let's try building again. Yes, of course, please do. Maybe I should say, well, you can always compile. Okay. What couldn't fetch updates. So it's still having trouble with cache. All right. You know what? I am going to copy this piece of code here. Yes. I get in sometimes it's enough to just put the error message and it'll say, oh yes, it's in this line of code. And then I'm like, why didn't you fix it in the first place? So, I mean, we could even delete those 3 lines of code because, if the application is going down, it will be cleaned up anyways. Oh, what? Really? I will refactor the code and use a helper class to manage the listener's lifecycle. Isn't there another solution? Can't you make sure that you execute this piece of code on the main actor? I remember I had this issue before, but I don't remember how I fixed it. Yeah. Okay, so okay, so I'm going to take a quick look at what it implemented earlier this afternoon. So it didn't implement a dinit method. Well, that is, for now, I'm going to do that as well. So we'll just disable this and then just try to run it anyways. Because I'd rather want to show how the real-time remote config works than solving this very edge casey concurrency problem. All right, so here we are, and I can tap on the button and perform our summarization feature. And now if I go into our remote config console and turn this feature off and publish the change, in the background you will see remote config updated, and now I don't have to restart the application, tap the button, and boom, it says the summarization feature is currently disabled. Ta-da! That calls for a party popper emoji, folks, and the awesome emoji. So, and I can also, just as easily, I can turn it back on, and then let's take talk like, oh, Jony Ive. Let's talk like Jony Ive. That should be interesting. So now we update both values. Here's our simulator. We can use the feature again. Well, it's not as Jony Ive as I thought it might be. But what we can do, so I'll show you one more thing before we'll wrap up. And to do that, let me make sure that we don't see anything you shouldn't be seeing. I am working on an application that helps me to summarize blog posts. I want to add some personality to the app and make it summarize the texts in the style of Jony Ive. Can you please rewrite my prompt to make sure that it uses the same kind of words and phrases and patterns as Jony Ive? Here is the prompt I have. All right, and then let's quickly grab our prompt. So let's take that, go here, and then remove this part. And then let's see what Gemini comes up with. So, reframing a functional prompt through the lens of Jony Ive's design philosophy is about shifting from mere instruction to a statement of intent and purpose. It's about the why behind the process. Oh, isn't that nice? I really like it. Okay. So it messed up the rendering. Well, it didn't understand what I wanted, so let's try this once more. Please rewrite the following prompt so I can use it to call the Gemini API. Let's try it again. Sometimes you have to be more specific. Okay. Okay, let's try it. So the process. And then this. And then we're going to delete that first part, save it, and now go back into the application. Where is it? Here it is. And it should have received an updated prompt. So let's see how it works. That is disappointing. I've got one more idea. Do we have a gem? Here we go. So let's try using a gem. Jony Ive prompt creator. Your task. And we are going to use the original prompt. This one here. And then important reply in the style of Jony Ive. Jony Ive summarizer. Blog post summarizer. And then we'll use the magic wand summarize the following blog post in the style of Jony Ive in less than 3 sentences. Let's do it this way. But unable to rewrite. Okay. Help me to turn this into a powerful prompt for Gemini. For the Gemini API. Let's see. I'm guessing that there is something in the system prompt that prevents it from impersonating other people. Oh. Okay, let's try this. Text to summarize. Distill its core essence into a summary of no more than, let's use 4 sentences. Use the kind of language, vocabulary, grammar, and phrasing that Jony Ive would use to explain an Apple product. So, publishing changes. Let's go back into our simulator and try this one more time. This is really a little bit generic. Let's try it with this one. Yeah. Let me try to do a Jony Ive impression. In crafting a seamless, intuitive user experience, we must embrace simplicity and elegance. The stretchy header effect elegantly adapts to the user's interaction without burdening the app with additional state complexity. By leveraging SwiftUI's visual effect modifier, we create a dynamic visual experience that harmonizes with the underlying architecture, enhancing both functionality and aesthetic purity. This approach ensures that every element of the design serves a purpose, contributing to the cohesive, effortless flow that defines Apple's product philosophy. How's that? So, and there you go. How to use remote config to remotely control your application, help you to change behavior, turn features on and off, and there is just so much more. So you can even say, well, I want to enable a feature for just a group of people, or I want to slowly roll it out. So there are, let's see, where are we? So you can define rollouts. You can run A/B tests, you can define conditions under which certain features are turned on and off, and you can even use AI to personalize your remote config values for users. So we could use AI to fine-tune the AI to use the prompts that make users most happy. Nice. So, with that, I think we've achieved quite a lot in slightly more than an hour, and I am very pleased. There is still a bunch of things that I want to go through with this application. So one of the things I want to explore is, for example, how to use Spotlight to power local search and plug into the iOS system. So that is something that we might look into next time, or maybe there is something else. But there's just a ton of features that we can look into. All right, so thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. It was great fun, and I hope you learned something. Well, a couple of people told me that they learned something new today, so that's great. And if you like this video, do give me a thumbs up. It really helps. Subscribe to the channel. I'll be back next week. Also, we are going to go on another live stream on Thursday on the Firebase channel, and I will have one of our product managers, Kirupa, and we are going to vibe code something with Nano Banana. And everybody's been going wild about Nano Banana. I've been playing around with it as well. It's super fun. It's an image generation model, and it is fantastic. And I'm really looking forward to what we're going to build on the live stream on Thursday. So if you're interested in that, definitely tune in. It's already staged on the Firebase YouTube channel. Also, if you happen to speak Portuguese, then you should also tune in, I think, tomorrow, when Marina and Seba and Rosario, who are colleagues of mine, will give a Q&A on their roadshow in Brazil about Firebase. So, and that's going to be in Portuguese. So unfortunately, I don't speak Portuguese, so I will tune in to support them, but I'll have to use the subtitles to understand what they're talking about. All right. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great rest of your day, and I will see you on Thursday or next week. Bye.